The room went completely silent before anyone even understood what had just happened. Prince George stood frozen. His ceremonial folder was lying open on the floor. Queen Camilla's voice was still echoing against the palace walls. Then King Charles moved. His face hardened. His restraint vanished completely. And right in front of Catherine courtiers and stunned family members, the king finally lost control. What followed transformed a simple royal rehearsal into the most devastating family rupture of his entire reign. Like this video if you want more royal deep dives, and subscribe to Vintage Exposed so you never miss what happens next. The rehearsal room ambush. Catherine moved first. She didn't hesitate. She stepped squarely between her young son and Camilla, placing one protective hand firmly behind George's back. Then she ordered the Queen Consort to move away from him. The closed rehearsal at Buckingham Palace had been arranged for a youth investiture ceremony, a formal event where young people would receive honors for public service. George had been asked to practice presenting a commemorative charter. He would stand beside his mother and his grandfather. However, Camilla entered the room already furious. She had recently learned that the young prince would perform a ceremonial role once handled informally by members of her own household. She perceived this small change as a much larger issue. To her, it signified that influence was rapidly shifting toward Catherine and the next generation, which meant her own position was quietly diminishing. George barely had time to grasp the gravity of the situation before Camilla aggressively struck the heavy folder from his hands and gripped his small shoulder, demanding to know why he was being pushed forward before he had earned his place. The boy did not answer her. His face tightened and his breathing quickened. He looked desperately toward Catherine, silently, searching for permission to escape. Charles remained completely still for one unbearable moment, disbelief holding him frozen in place. But humiliation quickly followed the disbelief as he saw his young grandson fighting back tears while his wife continued to speak down to him. Something deep inside the king finally broke. He slammed his hand violently against the heavy wooden rehearsal table. "Leave this room," Charles shouted, shocking everyone present. Senior royal aides immediately lowered their eyes to the floor, and Catherine kept George safe behind her. Camilla stared at the monarch, looking as though she no longer recognized the angry man standing before her. But Charles did not soften. He repeated the order slower this time, and with more menace. Finally, the Queen Consort turned toward the heavy oak door. That was when Catherine noticed the crumpled paper still crushed in Camilla's hand. It was a copied seating memorandum, a highly confidential document showing where each royal would stand during the upcoming ceremony, with George's name heavily marked in red ink. This discovery completely redefined the meaning of Camilla's aggressive outburst. She had not simply lost control in a moment of anger. She had arrived fully prepared for a confrontation. George bent down to collect the drop folder, but his small hands trembled too badly to grip its edges. Catherine quietly knelt, lifted it for him, and held it tightly against her chest. Charles watched his grandson turn away in shame, and the fury on the king's face collapsed into something much heavier: shame. As the heavy doors closed behind Camilla, Charles walked over to pick up the Mark memorandum. The attack was no longer just an explosion of anger. It pointed to a much deeper, darker struggle over George's future. The withdrawing room confession. Catherine quickly took George into a private room, closing the heavy door behind them. This room was meant for quiet conversations away from palace officials and events. However, it felt anything but calm. George sat silently beside her, looking down at the patterned carpet. Catherine held his small hand, trying to fight the guilt rising in her chest. George had recently started lessons about royal ceremonies and the responsibilities he might one day take on. These lessons were important. Every time he appeared in public, it showed his growth and prepared him for his future role in the royal family. Catherine had always insisted that this training be gradual and age-appropriate. Some ambitious courtiers wanted him to start training earlier, eager to see him in public more often. But after what happened in the rehearsal room, Catherine began to doubt if she had allowed palace expectations to come too close, too soon. Finally, George looked up and quietly asked if he had done something wrong by accepting his role. Catherine knelt before him, looking into his eyes. She told him the anger aimed at him was never his fault. He had followed instructions and trusted the adults around him. They had failed him. Just then, Charles entered the room. He expected to find anger. Instead, he saw his grandson in silence and his daughter-in-law trying to stay composed. The king began to apologize, but George interrupted with a question that stunned Charles. "Why did Camilla seem to hate me?" Charles struggled to respond. For years, he had tried to balance family feelings and royal duties. This situation was more than just a family dispute. Camilla had aimed her resentment at a child, and George wanted an explanation. A few moments later, Prince William received the news through a secure phone line. He immediately wanted to know who was in the room and who had let Camilla into the closed rehearsal. He made it clear to Charles that this was not just a private disagreement. It was a serious breach of trust involving the heir's household. Catherine pressed Charles for the truth. He finally admitted that Camilla had questioned George's growing role several times before. She often complained in private about his new duties. Charles confessed he had dismissed her comments, thinking they were just insecurities and not real threats. This admission changed the mood in the room. Catherine then asked when Camilla's resentment had really started. Charles looked down and revealed it all began at one specific ceremony when Camilla decided Prince George was a threat. The spark of resentment. The attack did not start in the rehearsal room. It began months earlier during a private ceremony at Windsor Castle, where forced smiles, polished palace protocol, and polite applause hid true feelings. Prince George received a minor honor that seemed harmless to everyone except Camilla. She watched Charles praise the boy's sense of duty and saw Catherine standing proudly beside him. Then Charles said something specific that changed everything. From that sunny afternoon on, Camilla no longer saw a child. She saw her royal influence fading. Earlier, the family gathered for a private ceremony to transfer several youth patronages into a new program linked to Catherine and George's future household. A patronage is a formal connection to a charity. This arrangement aimed to prepare George gently. He was not getting real power. He was being slowly introduced to his future duties. Catherine understood why this mattered. She worked hard to keep George's role limited, knowing that unrealistic public expectations could turn his childhood into a burden. However, the official palace briefing described George as representing the continuity of the sovereign's public mission. This wording made the moment seem more significant than just a family lesson. While Charles saw reassurance in those words, Camilla saw a sign of her replacement. Tension grew during the evening reception when Charles put a hand on George's shoulder, adjusted the boy's ceremonial medal, and told guests, "One day this will all be safest in his hands." The king spoke with pride, not intending to be cruel, but Camilla heard that sentence and slowly raised her glass without drinking. Catherine noticed a sudden change in Camilla's expression. Before anyone could speak to her, Camilla quietly left the room without saying goodbye. Later that night, she confronted Charles in a private sitting room. She accused him of treating her as temporary, while celebrating a future without her. Charles tried to reassure her, but refused to take back his praise for George or to reduce the boy's role to ease her fears. This hurt Camilla more than he realized. She felt rejected as a wife and weakened beside the throne. Her resentment grew. Camilla started asking for confidential papers about George's upcoming ceremonial appearances, saying her household needed them for scheduling. These papers were for organizing royal duties. However, many returned to Charles's desk with aggressive handwritten objections. The notes questioned whether ambitious staff was promoting George too quickly. Catherine found these notes during a routine household review. She recognized the same aggressive handwriting on a rehearsal memo from Camilla months later. The truth was clear. The attack on her son had not happened suddenly. It had been building over time, grievance by grievance. Charles finally realized how long Camilla's anger had been brewing in secret, but she had already returned to the drawing room to defend herself. The family's private conflict was about to escalate into a very direct, very ugly confrontation. The drawing room showdown. Catherine kept her voice calm when Camilla returned. This made their confrontation more dangerous. With young George safely away from the palace, and Charles standing nervously between them, the Princess of Wales closed the drawing room door. She demanded an explanation. No aides or private secretaries were present to soften the situation. Catherine spoke fiercely like a mother whose child had just been scared. Camilla replied coldly, believing the monarchy was trying to erase her. Catherine had requested this meeting before the palace could respond officially. Without any protective aides present, this meeting was even more serious. George had already left the grounds with a trusted member of Catherine's household. The king had agreed to face this growing crisis privately, hoping Camilla would apologize before it escalated into a bigger family feud. Camilla entered the room with her jaw set and hands steady, showing no shame. Catherine told her clearly that a disagreement over palace planning did not justify humiliating a child in public, knocking papers from his hands, or gripping his shoulder in anger. Camilla listened silently. When it came time for her to apologize, she flatly refused, changing the room's atmosphere. Camilla argued that ambitious advisors were pushing George forward, wanting to weaken everyone between William and the throne. She insisted he was not just being trained. He was being used to shift influence away from her and toward Catherine's side of the family. Catherine stepped closer, lowering her voice to a dangerous whisper. "George is a child," she said. "He is not your rival." Without hesitating, Camilla responded, saying her words revealed her underlying motives. She saw a scared boy as a threat to her position. Charles finally intervened, unable to stay silent. He asked how Camilla obtained the marked rehearsal memorandum, a restricted paper showing roles during a secure event. It should not have reached her without authorization. Camilla reached for a glass of water on the table, but Catherine slid the memorandum toward her first. Camilla stared at her own notes on the paper. Finally, she admitted that a senior official had secretly given it to her after warning her that major ceremonial privileges were being taken from her staff. Charles carefully removed his glasses and put them beside the paper. He asked directly if she had planned the confrontation. Camilla refused to name the official who had given her the document. Her silence confirmed that someone in the palace had been giving her confidential information and deepening her fear. Catherine then set a clear condition for Charles until the specific source was identified and removed. Prince George would not participate in any program or event connected to Camilla's household. Her silence spoke louder than any confession, forcing the king to confront a difficult question. Did his love for her allow him to protect her from the consequences of her actions? A monarch can issue orders or remove privileges with a signature, but a husband cannot erase the past of the woman before him. Charles now faced two conflicting roles at once. The king's decision. Charles wanted to handle the major damage quietly. However, Catherine saw every delay as a weakness, and William felt it was a serious betrayal. The situation had grown more complex. It was no longer just about one angry outburst. It was now about whether the king's loyalty to his wife was more important than the safety of his heir's family. Charles quickly called a private meeting with only Catherine, his senior private secretary, and Prince William on a secure audio line. They focused on the family's safety and long-term royal planning. Palace protocol gave the king substantial power over his household. He could limit access to activities without causing a public uproar. William spoke first and clearly demanded that Camilla be removed from every event with George until they knew the full truth. He argued that the incident crossed a line that no written apology could fix. His son entered a royal rehearsal seeking guidance, but left thinking he caused a family crisis. Charles hesitated to agree to such a strong request. He worried that this drastic action would not only hurt Camilla's staff, but might also harm their fragile marriage. He suggested that more specific restrictions could protect George without dividing the palace. William firmly rejected any compromise. He said, "My marriage wouldn't survive sending my child back into a room where he feels unsafe. Yours won't survive that either." Catherine stayed calm, but was just as firm. She told Charles that George already felt shaken by the encounter. Forcing him to continue as before would teach him that royal duty mattered more than his fears. This was essential because they were preparing the boy for a lifetime of service. If the palace failed to keep him safe now, it would leave a lasting mark on his future responsibilities. A heavy silence fell over the call. Afterward, Charles sat alone and read George's brief account of the morning. The boy wrote about the fallen folder, his mother stepping forward, and the moment his grandfather yelled. Then he read one specific line and stopped. "I thought Grandpapa would be angry with me too." Those words broke down Charles's last defenses. A quick palace review found the source of a copied memo. Camilla's deputy household secretary had secretly sent private schedules involving Catherine and George, bypassing normal rules. This suggested a planned effort to monitor their growing roles and fuel the queen consort's growing resentment. Charles lifted his fountain pen over an interim order. His private secretary waited silently. He eventually signed the document and pushed it away, declaring that no royal title would make his grandson feel afraid. With that signature, Charles took full control of the palace, though he couldn't foresee how Camilla would react to what he had taken from her. Camilla received the harsh order in what she thought was a secure room. The typed document was only 2 pages long, but it drastically limited her role. Her trusted aides were removed from George's schedule. She lost access to all youth events indefinitely, and her role in the upcoming investiture was eliminated. She read the last paragraph twice before dismissing everyone in the room without explanation. For the first time since becoming queen consort, she realized a crucial truth. Charles had not only rebuked her, he had clearly chosen to stand against her. The boy's forgiveness and the final verdict. Camilla sat in silence, long after the heavy door closed behind her. The interim order was a temporary royal instruction, meant to limit access during an ongoing internal review. But to her, nothing felt temporary. Her household was completely barred from attending rehearsals, briefings, and any private meetings involving Prince George. Without warning, her deputy household secretary was put on unpaid leave. All access logs, private messages, and documents were secured for a forensic review. She felt deep humiliation long before the public learned of the situation. She noticed Catherine and William's influence in every restriction laid out in the order. Camilla saw this harsh order as clear proof that they had more emotional power over Charles than she did. For months, the queen consort feared being pushed aside, and now the king's signature seemed to confirm her fears. Eventually, Charles came into her private rooms without an aide. He asked her to apologize to George personally, not through a statement or palace staff. He wanted the boy to hear from her that the attack was completely wrong and that he should not be blamed. Camilla felt her anger return. "You have already judged me," she said bitterly. "You only want words that make your judgment seem kind." The king calmly replied that kindness wasn't the issue. George had been genuinely scared, and she refused to name the official who gave her the private information. He could not protect her from serious consequences while she continued to hide the source of the attack. Camilla said nothing more. Charles paused at the heavy door after their tense conversation, waiting for her to call him back. Silence filled the room. He slowly lowered his head and walked away, creating a divide between them more powerful than any argument. The suspended official later provided a detailed account during the palace review. He admitted that Camilla had often questioned whether George's new duties would cover charitable roles meant specifically for the queen consort. This confession showed her fears stem from repeated inquiries and constant monitoring, not just one angry moment. Catherine received the summary of the review and saw George's name heavily circled in several complaints. This proved the rehearsal attack was part of a larger ongoing campaign. Camilla sat alone beside an untouched silver tea tray. She slowly removed a heavy bracelet that Charles had given her years ago, placed it carefully in a drawer, and left it open. Unexpectedly, Prince George asked to speak privately with his grandfather, King Charles, despite his father William's anger. The future of the royal family would rest on the boy's words. George didn't ask for punishment for Camilla, the queen consort. He didn't demand her removal from the palace. Instead, alone with Charles, he shared his biggest fear, that the family might break apart forever just because he took on royal duties. In this heartfelt moment, George showed more self-control than the adults around him. Charles listened and told George the truth. Protecting others isn't about choosing sides. Love doesn't justify harm, and facing consequences doesn't erase love. He promised George he would never again be in a situation where he had to worry about his safety due to an adult's anger. George then placed the ceremonial folder on the table. When Charles reached for it, George kept his hand on the cover and said softly, "I still want to do it." The king paused. George was scared, but he was determined to carry out his duty. He wanted to do this not because he had to, but because he wouldn't let fear control him. However, George made it clear he would only accept an apology from Camilla if she spoke honestly, without her royal title or any prepared statements. The title wouldn't protect her from the need to be honest. Catherine, George's mother, supported his request when Charles repeated it. Camilla faced a tough choice. She could either let go of her pride and speak honestly, or hold on to her defenses and risk losing the family's trust. George offered the palace a chance for dignity, but before Camilla could take it, news about their private meeting leaked. Reports detailed the fallen folder and Catherine's fierce intervention, along with Charles's orders for Camilla to leave. One image stood out from the headlines: Prince George leaving Buckingham Palace with his mother's hand on his shoulder, turning away from the cameras. The public saw a scared child being protected, not royal strategy. Sympathy turned to judgment, and the palace felt the pressure. Camilla faced a different crisis. Many debated whether she should keep her ceremonial roles with younger family members. She realized that in trying to defend her position, she had harmed the very influence she wanted to keep. Under pressure, Camilla agreed to meet George privately. She entered the room without aides or prepared statements, expressing her fear of becoming irrelevant as the monarchy changed. This fear had caused her to treat George badly, even though he hadn't done anything wrong. George listened and accepted her apology, but said that trust wasn't fully restored. He needed time before attending family events with her again. Catherine fully supported him, showing that forgiveness doesn't mean giving up the necessary boundaries for his safety. Charles then made the interim decision permanent. Camilla lost control over George's ceremonial planning. The family did not return to its old ways. Instead, they moved forward with stronger boundaries and hard-earned forgiveness. One clear truth emerged: the crown is strongest when it protects the person underneath it. Did Charles handle this family crisis well, or did he wait too long to protect his grandson? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more on the royal family. Sometimes the biggest threats to the crown come from inside the palace, not from the press. See you next time.